11 players vanish after a match. 34 years later, a biker finds a clue that changes everything. They are ordinary, small-town heroes in blue and gold, a captain with a baby on the way, a locker room still humming with victory, and a shower left running. The biker pries a rusted service door and stumbles into a sealed chamber. 11 men sat in a perfect circle, artifacts arranged like a deliberate final message. Buried with them are dusty files that hint Millfield's collapse wasn't fate, but design. Who engineered a town's death, and how far would those men go to force the world to look? The first drops of rain arrived during the second half, soft and cold against the back of Derek Holloway's neck as he tracked the ball across Riverside Field's patchy grass. September in western Pennsylvania always smelled like this, wet earth and rusting metal, the Allegheny River running heavy just beyond the trees. The sodium lights flickered overhead, casting the players in stuttering yellow that made their shadows jump and twist. 340 people in the stands, maybe more, hard to count in the dark gaps between the lights. For Millfield, population 8,400 and dropping every year, this was a crowd worth celebrating. Derek felt the weight of it. His last home game, 28 years old with a baby on the way, and a third-generation steelworker's knees that clicked when he ran. The Johnstown Rangers were pressing hard, 2-2 with 12 minutes left, and the field had turned to mud in the corners where the drainage had failed years ago, and the town council kept promising to fix it, and never did. Vincent Chen took the ball down the right wing, his slight frame deceptive in its speed. Derek remembered Vincent at 14, the only Asian kid in Millfield, stocking shelves at his family's corner grocery, while other boys played in the street. Now Vincent moved like water, finding gaps that shouldn't exist. "Ghost!" Vincent's voice cut through the rain. Jimmy Patterson materialized at the edge of the box, 19 years old and too good for this town, too loyal to leave it. The college scouts had come for him 2 years running. Jimmy told them his mother was sick, told them Millfield needed him, never told them he was terrified of leaving. The pass came hard and low. Jimmy's first touch killed it dead. His second sent it into the upper right corner of the net, past the Johnstown keeper's outstretched fingers. 3-2. The crowd noise hit like a physical thing, a roar that briefly made the crumbling stadium feel like something that mattered, somewhere that still had a pulse. Derek felt it in his chest, that old familiar surge, pride mixed with something darker, something that tasted like grief. Because he knew. They all knew now. The Vargas brothers were running toward Jimmy, Mateo reaching him first, 22 years old with his father's compact build and his mother's fierce eyes. Luis followed, 2 years, older, steadier, the one who'd held the family together when the mill laid off their father in '84. Both of them wearing the royal blue and gold, like it meant something beyond fabric and thread. It did mean something. It meant everything. That was the problem. Derek jogged back to midfield, catching Vincent's eye. A brief nod passed between them, acknowledgement of the private weight they carried. The documents, the truth about what this town really was, what had been done to it, to all of them. Knowledge that sat in their stomachs like poisoned food. The final 12 minutes passed in a blur of desperate Johnstown attacks and last-ditch Millfield defending. When the referee's whistle cut through the rain at 9:47 p.m., the scoreboard still read 3-2. Victory. Triumph in a place where triumphs had become rare and precious and heartbreaking. Derek stood at midfield, rain streaming down his face, and let his teammates mob him. Hands on his shoulders, voices in his ears, Jimmy's arm around his neck. Mateo shouting something in Spanish that might have been a prayer or a curse or both. The crowd was chanting their names, all 11 of them. They walked the perimeter, waving to people who'd known them since they were children, who'd watched them grow up in a town that was dying by degrees, its heart stopping in slow motion. Sarah was in the stands somewhere, 8 months pregnant, glowing even in the terrible light. Derek found her near the home bench, caught her smile, held it like something he could keep. At 10:03 p.m., they descended the concrete stairs to the basement locker room. The door was heavy metal, institutional green, installed when the stadium was built during the Depression. It closed behind them with an echoing clang. Inside, someone turned up the radio. Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA, which would have been funny if anything was funny anymore. Derek sat on the wooden bench in front of his locker, number 7, and started unlacing his cleats. Around him, his teammates did the same. Vincent was at the far end, already changed into street clothes, his game jersey folded carefully in his bag. He looked at Derek. Derek looked back. No words needed. Jimmy twisted the cap off a beer, the hiss of carbonation loud in the enclosed space. "Hell of a goal, Ghost," someone said, and Jimmy grinned that crooked grin that made him look 12 instead of 19. The shower turned on in the back. Steam began to rise, mixing with the smell of grass and sweat and old concrete. Someone's radio played on. The fluorescent lights hummed their steady electrical song. Derek pulled his street clothes from his locker but didn't put them on, not yet. He looked around the room at these men, his brothers, really, in all the ways that mattered. Faces he'd known his whole life, faces that trusted him to lead. "You all sure?" he asked, quiet enough that only those closest heard. Mateo answered first. "We're sure." "No going back," Vincent added, softer still. "Wasn't any going forward anyway," Louis said, and there was no bitterness in it, just a flat statement of fact that cut deeper than anger could. Jimmy took a long pull from his beer, set it down on the bench only half finished. It would sit there, warming, for hours, for days, for 34 years. Derek stood, left his street clothes folded beside his wallet, his keys, his wedding ring on top. Sarah would need to get it sized down for Hope someday. He walked to the shower in his uniform, the jersey heavy with rain and sweat, and stood in the steam. One by one, the others joined him. 11 men in royal blue and gold, standing in the mist like they were already ghosts, already memories. Outside above them, Riverside Field sat empty in the rain. The scoreboard's lights went dark at 10:30 p.m., timer-controlled, saving the town a few dollars on the electric bill. The gravel parking lot held 7 vehicles, beaded with rainwater, patient as gravestones. At 10:45 p.m., Walter Krantz made his rounds. 67 years old, knees as bad as Derek's, he'd been the security guard here since 1973. He heard the radio playing in the locker room, saw the lights on under the door. Boys celebrating, he thought. Let them have it. God knows this town doesn't give them much else. He checked the perimeter fence, the equipment shed, the ticket booth. Everything secure. The rain was picking up, drumming on the metal roof of the concession stand. Walter pulled his collar up against it. The players' cars sat in their usual spots. Derek's Silverado with the dent in the passenger door from where Sarah had backed into a post at the grocery store. The Vargas brothers' Ford Escort with the faded Guatemalan flag decal in the rear window. Jimmy's motorcycle, a beat-up Yamaha he'd rebuilt himself, covered with a tarp against the weather. Vincent's Honda Civic, 7 years old and meticulously maintained. All present, all accounted for. Walter pulled the heavy chain through the main gate, clicked the padlock shut. The sound echoed across the empty field like a period at the end of a sentence. He drove away at 10:52 p.m., taillights disappearing into the rain, leaving Riverside Field to its ghosts. In the basement, the shower ran. The radio played. 11 men stood in the steam and the fluorescent light, victorious and doomed, preparing to walk into the dark and make themselves the question their town would never be able to answer. The last thing Derek did before they left was turn off the lights. One switch, and the locker room fell into shadow, lit only by the red glow of the radio's power indicator and the pale ghost light bleeding in from the stairwell. They went out through the service entrance, the one that opened onto the woods behind the field. The door locked automatically behind them, rain-slick and final. By midnight, Riverside Field was silent and empty, a monument to something that had already ended. The town just didn't know it yet. The parking lot gravel crunches under Sarah Holloway's tires as she pulls her mother's Buick beside Derek's Silverado. The truck sits crooked across two spaces like always, passenger door dented from where he'd backed into a loading dock at the mill 3 years ago. She can see his Steelers air freshener swinging from the rearview mirror. She kills the engine and sits for a moment, letting the radio finish its song. Nearly midnight now. The sodium lights paint everything the color of old photographs. Derek said he'd need a ride. Said the guys were planning to celebrate hard after the season finale, and he didn't want to drive home buzzed with Sarah 7 months pregnant. Responsible. That's Derek. Always thinking ahead. Always careful about the things that matter. She pushes open the car door and stands, one hand instinctively supporting her belly. Hope. That's what they're naming her. Shifts and kicks. Sarah smiles despite the late hour, despite the cold settling into the September air. In 5 months, Derek will hold his daughter. In 5 months, everything changes. The other vehicles sit in their familiar constellation. The Vargas brothers' Ford Escort with its faded Guatemalan flag decal on the bumper. Vincent Chen's sensible Honda Civic, always the cleanest car in any lot. Jimmy Patterson's motorcycle under its tarp, secured with 3 separate chains because he's paranoid about theft. But no voices carry from the locker room. No laughter. No music. Sarah crosses to the stadium's side entrance, her sneakers whispering against the pavement. The door stands propped open with a cinder block. Standard practice after games so the guys don't get locked in. She descends the concrete stairs, one hand trailing along the clammy brick wall. "Derek? You down here?" Her voice echoes in the stairwell. Below, she can hear water running. The shower, probably. Maybe they're all still cleaning up. She reaches the basement level and pushes through the locker room door. The overhead fluorescents hum their perpetual electric song. A radio on the bench plays quiet classic rock. Bob Seger, maybe, or Springsteen. The air smells like sweat and grass, and the menthol ointment the guys use for sore muscles. But the room is empty. "Derek?" Sarah walks between the rows of lockers, her heart beginning a strange, arrhythmic dance. Duffel bags sit on benches, exactly where they're always left. Cleats scattered across the floor. A half-eaten sandwich on waxed paper beside someone's locker. Beer bottles sweating on concrete, still cold to the touch when she picks one up. In Derek's locker, his street clothes hang on their hook. His wallet sits on the upper shelf beside his keys and wedding ring. Sarah stares at the ring. Derek never takes it off. Ever. Not for games, not for work at the mill. Not even that time his knuckle swelled up and the emergency room doctor suggested cutting it free. He'd iced the hand for 3 days rather than risk damaging the band. The shower is still running. She crosses to the tiled area at the back of the locker room, steam curling in the air. 3 shower heads spray water against empty walls, rivulets pooling toward the central drain. Soap suds circle slowly, not yet dissolved. This isn't funny. Her voice sounds small, even to her own ears. She turns off the showers one by one, the sudden silence more oppressive than the white noise of water. Then she's moving faster, checking the bathroom stalls, the equipment closet, the trainer's office with its examination table and medical supplies. Empty. All of it. Sarah returns to the main locker room and begins opening the metal doors, methodically checking each player's space. Vincent's locker, wallet, keys, a photograph of his parents tucked into the corner. Mateo's, a small wooden cross on a chain, a letter in Spanish folded into eighths, his car keys with the Guatemalan flag keychain. Luis's locker beside his brother's. Everything present. Everything normal. Jimmy's locker contains his motorcycle jacket, his electronics toolbox, and the acceptance letter from Penn State he'd turned down last spring. Sarah remembers Derek mentioning it, how Jimmy could have had a full scholarship but stayed because his mother was sick. She moves through all 11 lockers, 11 wallets, 11 sets of keys, 11 lives interrupted mid-sentence. The beer bottles are still cold. The radio plays on. Sarah's breath comes faster now. She runs back to the stairs and climbs, taking them 2 at a time despite her pregnancy, emerging into the parking lot where all the vehicles sit waiting for owners who've simply dissolved into air. She circles Derek's truck, cupping her hands against the driver's window. His thermos sits in the cup holder. His work gloves rest on the bench seat. The registration and insurance card are clipped to the sun visor, exactly where they're supposed to be. Sarah tries the door. Unlocked. Like always in Millfield. She slides into the driver's seat, surrounded by the smell of her husband, coffee and steel dust, and the Irish Spring soap he uses. The seat is adjusted for his height, the mirrors angled for his sightlines. On the floor beneath the passenger seat, she finds Hope's first gift, a tiny Cavaliers onesie Derek bought 2 weeks ago, still in its packaging. That's when the first sob breaks free. She stumbles out of the truck and back toward the stadium entrance, moving on instinct now, checking the woods that border the parking lot. But the tree line is solid darkness, impenetrable, offering nothing. The field itself is empty, the bleachers vacant, the scoreboard dark, still displaying the final result. Home 3, visitor 2. Sarah returns to her mother's Buick and sits in the driver's seat with the door open. Her hands shake as she digs through her purse for change, finds a quarter, feeds it into the payphone bolted to the stadium's exterior wall. The operator answers on the second ring.
Professional, efficient, used to drunk calls and domestic disputes and the routine emergencies of a dying mill town. 911, what's your emergency? Sarah opens her mouth, closes it. How do you say this? How do you make it real? My husband, she manages. His whole team. They were in the locker room after their game and now they're gone. All of them. But their cars are here. Their wallets, everything. They just... Ma'am, I need you to slow down. What's your location? Riverside Field, the soccer stadium. I came to pick up my husband, Derek Holloway, and... Have you checked inside the building? Yes, everything's there except the men. The shower's running, there's food half-eaten. It's like they've vanished in the middle of nothing. A pause on the line. Sarah can hear the dispatcher's keyboard clicking. How many people are missing, ma'am? 11. The whole team. 11 men. Another pause, longer this time. Officers are on their way. I need you to stay at the location and not touch anything else. Can you do that? Sarah nods, then realizes the operator can't see her. Yes, I'll stay. She hangs up and stands in the parking lot, one hand on her belly, staring at the row of abandoned vehicles, the Silverado with its crooked parking job, the Escort with its patriotic decal, Vincent's sensible Civic, Jimmy's tarped motorcycle. 11 men walked down into that basement locker room after a victory that had made the whole town cheer. 11 men who had families and jobs and futures, and now there's just silence and the hum of fluorescent lights, and beer still cold enough to drink. In the distance, Sarah hears the first siren beginning its wail through Millfield's empty streets. She wraps her arms around herself and Hope, waiting in the sodium light darkness while her husband's truck sits 3 feet away, with his daughter's first outfit still waiting on the floor. The scoreboard looms against the night sky. Home 3, visitor 2. Victory has never felt more hollow. The coffee arrives cold at shift change, but Sarah Holloway drinks it anyway. She sits in a metal folding chair in the Millfield High School gymnasium, the largest public space in town, watching exhausted volunteers stagger in from the woods. They bring nothing. No torn clothing snagged on branches, no footprints disappearing toward the Allegheny, no blood. Just the same terrible absence that began when she found the locker room empty 2 nights ago. The gymnasium smells like industrial coffee, sweat, and desperation. Topographical maps cover 3 folding tables, marked with colored pins that mean nothing. Search grids, possible routes, areas cleared. The pins multiply, but the answers don't. Sarah's mother-in-law, Donna Holloway, sits beside her, gripping a styrofoam cup with both hands. The woman hasn't spoken in 6 hours. Through the double doors, Sarah can see the parking lot filling with television vans. Pittsburgh stations, Cleveland. One from as far as Philadelphia. The satellite dishes bloom like mechanical flowers, hungry for tragedy. Mrs. Holloway? Sarah looks up. A state police trooper stands over her, his uniform crisp despite 3 days without sleep. Behind him, 2 men in dark suits wait with the patience of people who've seen everything and believe nothing. I'm Agent Brennan, FBI. The taller man extends his hand. His grip is firm, professional, empty of comfort. This is Agent Torres. We'd like to ask you some questions. They've already asked. Everyone has. But Sarah nods, follows them to a corner of the gymnasium where someone's erected a makeshift interview space, using gym mats as walls. The acoustics are terrible. She can hear every whispered conversation, every crying mother, every volunteer radioing coordinates from the woods. Agent Brennan opens a yellow legal pad. His pen is expensive, probably government-issued. Walk me through the evening again, starting with when you last spoke to your husband. Around 6. Sarah's voice sounds mechanical to her own ears. She's told this story so many times it's become a script. Derek called from the stadium, said they'd won 3-2. He was celebrating with the guys. Asked if I could pick him up around 11:30. He'd been drinking? He said he'd had a couple beers. Derek didn't. She stops, rewinds. Derek knows better than to drive after drinking, especially with the baby coming. Brennan writes something. And you arrived at approximately 11:30 p.m.? 11:28. I checked my watch. The parking lot was full of vehicles, all of them. Derek's truck, the Vargas brothers' Escort, Vincent's Civic, Jimmy's motorcycle, even Coach Martinez's van, but he'd left with his wife hours before. Torres leans forward. He's younger than Brennan, with careful eyes that miss nothing. The locker room door, locked or unlocked? Unlocked, just like always after a game. Lights on? Yes. And the radio. WDVE was playing Led Zeppelin. The detail feels important, though Sarah doesn't know why. The showers were running, one of them anyway, steam everywhere. But no signs of disturbance, Brennan says, not a question. No, their bags were on the benches, wallets in the lockers, keys, wedding rings. Her voice cracks on the last word. She touches her own ring, the simple gold band Derek slipped on her finger 8 years ago in the basement of St. Anthony's. Everything except the men. The agents exchange a look Sarah can't interpret. Mrs. Holloway, I need you to think very carefully. Torres pulls out a photograph, a crime scene photo of the locker room, taken the night she called 911. Is there anything unusual about this scene? Anything that wasn't there normally, or something that should have been there but wasn't? Sarah studies the image. The blue-painted lockers, each door hanging open. The wooden benches scarred by decades of cleats. The concrete floor, still. Wet in places from shower overflow. I don't know, she whispers. It just looked like they'd stepped out for a minute. Like they were coming right back. But they didn't come back. 72 hours and they didn't come back. Through the gymnasium windows, Sarah watches dawn paint the sky the color of old bruises. Outside, the search teams are assembling again. She recognizes most of them. Tom Kowalski from the mill, before it closed. Sharon Vickers, who runs the Quick Mart. Bobby Chen, Vincent's younger brother, his face hollow with sleeplessness. The FBI brought dogs on the second day. German shepherds trained to find human remains, their handlers explaining with excruciating gentleness about scent cones and decomposition rates and probability grids. Sarah watched them work the woods between Riverside Field and the river, their tails wagging with professional enthusiasm, right up until they found nothing. Divers went into the Allegheny yesterday.
The current runs fast this time of year, they said. Bodies could travel miles downstream, could get caught in underwater debris, could surface weeks later or never at all. Sarah had vomited in the bushes, thinking of Derek trapped beneath black water. We're expanding the search radius, Brennan says, closing his legal pad. Bringing in helicopters with thermal imaging, and we're looking into the team's backgrounds. Financial records, phone records, anything that might suggest a motive. Motive for what? Donna Holloway speaks for the first time, her voice like gravel. You think 11 men just decided to disappear? To abandon their families? My son would never. We're not suggesting anything, ma'am. Torres's tone is gentle but unyielding. We're gathering information, that's all. But Sarah can read between the lines. She's been married to a steelworker long enough to understand when men in suits are preparing you for bad news. They think the team is dead, or gone, or involved in something dark that hasn't surfaced yet. The gymnasium door bangs open. A volunteer stumbles in, rain-soaked and wild-eyed. We found something. The room goes silent. Sarah's heart stops, restarts, hammers against her ribs hard enough to hurt. What? Brennan is already moving. Where? The woods. Maybe a quarter mile from the field. The volunteer is breathing hard, his face flushed. You need to see it. They convoy through the drizzle in a half-dozen vehicles. State police cruisers, FBI sedans, Sarah's mother's Buick, because Sarah refuses to stay behind. The woods are dense with oak and maple, the understory thick with mountain laurel and decades of leaf rot. They park on a service road Sarah's never noticed before and hike in single file, following orange surveyor's tape. The rain has stopped, but the trees still drip. Water slides down the back of Sarah's neck, soaking through her sweatshirt. 7 months pregnant, she struggles to keep pace. Donna stays beside her, one hand on
Sarah's elbow, both of them breathing in ragged gasps. They emerge into a small clearing. At its center, in a rough circle pressed into the wet leaves, are 11 pairs of shoes. Sarah recognizes Derek's immediately. Nike sneakers, the left one with a torn shoelace he'd been meaning to replace for weeks. Beside them, Jimmy Patterson's scuffed Converse. Mateo Vargas's Adidas with the Guatemalan flag drawn in Sharpie on the side. The shoes are arranged with deliberate precision, toes pointing inward toward an empty center, like the men had stepped out of them in unison and walked away barefoot into the woods. Jesus Christ, someone whispers. Brennan crouches beside the circle, careful not to disturb anything. He pulls out a flashlight, even though it's full daylight, sweeping the beam across the ground. The leaves inside the circle are compressed, matted, as if 11 men had stood there for some time. But there are no footprints leading away, no trampled undergrowth, no trail through the ferns and saplings. Just the shoes, arranged like tombstones, and the forest closing in on all sides. "Bag everything," Brennan orders. His voice has changed. Sarah can hear it. The shift from routine investigation to something else, something that has no protocol. "Get a perimeter up. I want soil samples, every leaf, every goddamn acorn photographed and cataloged." Torres is already on his radio, calling for the crime scene unit. Sarah can't move, can't breathe. She stares at Derek's shoes and thinks about the wedding ring he left in his locker, about the Cavaliers onesie folded in his truck's glove box, about the way he'd kissed her belly before leaving for the game and whispered, "See you soon, champ." She thinks about 11 men stepping out of their shoes in the middle of the woods and vanishing into rain and darkness. "Mrs. Holloway." A paramedic appears at her elbow, young woman, competent face. "You should sit down." "I'm fine." "Ma'am, you're pregnant. The stress—" "I said I'm fine!" Sarah's voice cracks across the clearing. Several people turn, concern written on their faces. She's not fine. Nothing is fine. Her husband is gone, and there are his shoes in a circle in the woods, and none of it makes sense. None of it follows any logic she understands. Donna's hand tightens on her arm. "Sarah, the baby." The baby, Hope. The daughter Derek will never meet. Sarah lets them guide her to a fallen log. Someone drapes a blanket over her shoulders. Someone else presses a bottle of water into her hands. She doesn't drink, just stares at the circle of shoes while FBI agents and state police and crime scene technicians swarm around her, documenting impossibility. The rain starts again as the sun sets. They erect a tent over the site, run generator-powered lights, work through the night. Sarah refuses to leave. She sits on the log with her mother-in-law, two women waiting for answers that don't come. By dawn, they've found nothing else. No blood, no fabric, no signs of struggle or violence or anything to explain where the men went. The bronze plaque arrived in sections on a flatbed truck from Pittsburgh, each piece carefully wrapped in protective foam. Sarah Holloway watched from her car as workers unloaded it in the Riverside Field parking lot, the same cracked asphalt where she'd found Derek's empty Silverado that night. 2 years, 730 days since the locker room shower ran hot into silence. The unveiling was scheduled for 2 o'clock, timed so Hope would sleep through it in her stroller. Sarah had dressed her daughter in yellow that morning, a bright, defiant color against the October gray. At 20 months, Hope had Derek's dark eyes and a laugh Sarah heard only in rare, unguarded moments. The child would never remember this day, which felt both merciful and unbearable. Donna Holloway arrived at 1:30, walking with the careful precision of someone who'd stopped trusting solid ground. Derek's mother had aged a decade in 2 years, her hair gone completely white, her shoulders permanently hunched, as if bracing for the next blow. "They're putting it on the south wall," Donna said, her voice flat. "Near the ticket booth." Sarah nodded. They'd shown her the design weeks ago. 11 names in raised letters, dates of birth but no dates of death, because how could you mark an ending that made no sense? In memory of the 1989 Millfield Cavaliers, missing but never forgotten. Missing, not dead, not lost. Missing, as if they might still walk out of those woods. The parking lot filled slowly. Families of the other players clustered in small groups, united by shared incomprehension. Maria Vargas stood with her surviving son Carlos, her black dress hanging loose on a frame that had shed 20 pounds of grief. The Chens arrived together, Vincent's parents and 2 younger sisters, their faces composed into the careful neutrality Sarah recognized from her own mirror. Jimmy Patterson's mother hadn't come. She'd died 6 months ago, her cancer finally claiming what the mystery had already hollowed out. Mayor Bradford took the podium at 2, his amplified voice carrying across the empty field. Sarah stopped listening after the first platitude. Tragic loss, enduring mystery, community strength. The words were polished stones worn smooth by repetition, offering no purchase for understanding. She looked instead at the stadium itself. Riverside Field had aged badly. Paint peeled from the bleachers in long strips. The scoreboard's electrical box hung open, its wires exposed like entrails. The groundskeeper still mowed, but weeds claimed the fence line, and dandelions erupted through cracks in the warning track. The town was dying. Everyone knew it. The mill had closed 3 months after the disappearance. Unrelated economic factors, the newspapers said, and Millfield's population had dropped below 8,000. For sale signs multiplied like gravestones. Young people left for Pittsburgh, for anywhere, understanding with animal instinct that this place offered only diminishing returns. Sarah had stayed. She had nowhere else to go, and leaving felt like betrayal. Agent Brennan stood near the back of the crowd, his presence a reminder that the case technically remained open. Sarah caught his eye once. He nodded with professional sympathy that communicated nothing. The FBI had spent 18 months and returned exactly 0 answers. No bodies, no witnesses, no evidence of violence or voluntary flight. Just absence, pure and absolute. The theories had metastasized wildly. Alien abduction, cult involvement, witness protection. A gambling debt massacre with bodies dumped in the Allegheny. Each explanation seemed both plausible and ridiculous, a Rorschach test revealing more about the theorist than the truth. The manicured lawn of possibility had given way to wilderness. Mayor Bradford pulled the canvas covering, revealing the plaque. Sunlight caught the polished bronze, making the names shimmer. Derek Holloway, Vincent Chen, Luis Vargas, Mateo Vargas, Jimmy Patterson, 7 more below. The crowd applauded softly, the sound uncertain and sad. Sarah lifted Hope from the stroller. The toddler squirmed, reaching for the bright memorial, her small hand opening and closing. "Dada?" she said, the word still new and imprecise. "No, baby," Sarah whispered. "Not today." Donna touched her arm. "You did well. Getting through this." Sarah wanted to laugh. Getting through implied movement, progress, a finish line somewhere ahead. This wasn't getting through. This was standing still while the world continued without explanation, learning to breathe around a weight that never lessened. After the ceremony, people approached with careful condolences. Maria Vargas embraced her without words. Vincent's father pressed an envelope into her hand, a gift card to the grocery store, kindness disguised as practicality. Sarah accepted it with gratitude that felt like drowning. By 4 o'clock, the crowd had dispersed. Workers packed up the podium and folding chairs, reducing the memorial to routine. Sarah remained, Hope asleep against her shoulder, staring at Derek's name rendered permanent in metal. She thought about the wedding ring still in the evidence locker downtown. The Cavaliers onesie folded in Hope's closet, unworn. The mortgage on a house built for 3 that now held 2. The careful arithmetic of single parenthood, and the savings account bleeding out despite her shifts at the hospital. The practical devastations of disappeared men. A wind rose off the river, carrying the smell of rust and standing water. The stadium lights flickered on automatically as dusk approached, their sodium glow the same sickly yellow as that night. Sarah watched shadows lengthen across the empty field where Derek had played his last game. Scored no goals, but captained his team to victory with the particular grace of someone who understood endings. She'd replayed that final phone call 10,000 times, his voice bright with beer and triumph. "We won, Sarah. 3-2. Ghost scored the winner in the 87th. I'll tell you all about it when you get here." 15 minutes later, he was gone. "I'm not giving up," she told the bronze names, her voice steady. "I don't care what the FBI says. I don't care if it takes the rest of my life." Hope stirred, murmuring something unintelligible against Sarah's neck. "Your dad is out there somewhere," Sarah continued, the words both promise and prayer. "And someday, maybe not today, maybe not for years, someone's going to find out what happened. Someone's going to bring him home." The stadium lights hummed, attracting early moths. In the distance, a train whistle sounded, heading east toward Pittsburgh and the wider world that had already forgotten 11 men from a dying town. Sarah walked to her car, buckling Hope into the car seat Derek had installed the week before he vanished. The bronze plaque gleamed in her rearview mirror as she pulled away, already collecting its first layer of October leaves. That night, after Hope was asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with the case file she'd assembled. Newspaper clippings, FBI interview transcripts, maps of the search areas covered in red marker. She added the ceremony program to the stack, another artifact of unresolved grief. The official investigation was closing. She'd received the letter last week. Insufficient evidence to justify continued resource allocation. Federal speak for giving up. But Sarah had made different calculations. Hope would grow up knowing her father's name, knowing he'd been real, been loved, been captain of a team that had played their last game with honor. And she would grow up knowing that some questions don't have expiration dates, that love doesn't accept bureaucratic conclusions. Somewhere in this town or these woods,
or the miles of river that had yielded nothing to the divers. There were answers. Physics didn't allow 11 men to simply dissolve. They'd gone somewhere, done something, been taken or chosen or destroyed by forces that left no trace. But they'd left Derek's ring. They'd left Jimmy's acceptance letter and Vincent's family photo and Mateo's wooden cross. They'd left their shoes arranged in a perfect circle in the woods, toes pointing inward toward a center that held nothing. They'd left clues, even if nobody understood them yet. Sarah opened her notebook to a fresh page and began writing questions she'd asked 1,000 times, hoping repetition might reveal what investigation had missed. The pen moved across paper with the persistence of prayer, filling the silence of a house built for 3. Outside, Millfield settled into its slow decline, another Rust Belt casualty in a decade that ground towns into memory. But in this kitchen, a woman who'd arrived pregnant and hopeful to an empty parking lot 2 years ago continued the work that officials had abandoned. The case was cold. The memorial was bronze. The world had moved on. But Sarah Holloway wasn't the world, and she'd made a promise to a daughter who deserved to know where she came from, even if the truth lived somewhere darker than anyone wanted to look. The night deepened. The notebook filled, and in her crib upstairs, Hope Holloway dreamed in colors she couldn't yet name, unaware that her entire life would be shaped by a September night when 11 men walked into silence and left only questions behind. The June afternoon hangs thick and gray over western Pennsylvania, the kind of humid stillness that makes even breathing feel like work. Rachel Kimura leans her Trek touring bike against a section of chain-link fence that sags like an old man's spine, rust eating through the metal in bleeding orange patches. The Millfield Ironworks sprawls before her like the skeleton of some prehistoric beast. Blast furnaces rise toward low clouds, their brick facades streaked with 40 years of rain and neglect. Broken conveyor systems freeze mid-arc, rusted solid in poses of industrial ballet. Windows gape in administrative buildings, glass long since shattered by vandals, or time, or simple surrender. Rachel's camera, a Canon 5D she's carried across 12 states, comes up automatically. Click. The light is perfect for this. Diffused, shadowless, turning everything the color of forgetting. She's been documenting America's industrial ruins for 3 years, ever since she quit her graphic design job in Portland and bought the bike. Abandoned steel mills in Gary, closed auto plants in Detroit, coal processing facilities in West Virginia that nature is slowly reclaiming, kudzu threading through control rooms like green blood through dead veins. But Millfield is different. Rachel pulls a printed article from her handlebar bag, the paper softened by weeks of weather and handling. The headline reads, 34 years later, Millfield still haunted by Cavalier's mystery. Below it, a grainy photograph shows 11 young men in blue and gold uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling with the unconscious confidence of people who believe they have futures. She's read everything about the case over the past month. The 1989 disappearance, the massive search, the theories that spiraled from rational to ridiculous, gambling debts, cult suicide, alien abduction, the FBI's eventual surrender, the memorial plaque at the deteriorating stadium 2 miles east. The gap in the fence is obvious, worn smooth by trespassers before her. Rachel glances around. The service road she biked in on is empty, the nearest occupied building a gas station 3 miles back, and slips through. Inside the perimeter, the scale becomes overwhelming. She's seen the aerial photographs, but standing beneath a cooling tower that rises 15 stories, its concrete flanks stained with mineral deposits like tears, feels the true weight of abandonment. 4,000 people once worked here. Now, there's only silence and the occasional creak of metal settling, contracting in temperature shifts it was never meant to survive. Rachel follows what remains of a service road, her boots crunching on gravel mixed with broken glass. The main rolling mill building dominates the eastern section, a cathedral of industry. its roof partially collapsed, pigeons wheeling through gaps where steam once vented. She photographs the control room, its panels still festooned with dials and switches, frozen in their last positions like the instruments in Pompeii. Beyond the rolling mill, an overgrown rail spur curves into terrain that rises slightly, where the ironworks backed against a wooded hillside. Rachel consults the historical site map she downloaded from the county archives. The spur should dead-end at a loading platform, but as she pushes through shoulder-high sumac and wild blackberry, brambles catching her jeans, the rails continue deeper than the map indicates. She almost misses it. The concrete structure is low to the ground, built directly into the hillside slope, camouflaged by decades of vegetation. Vines cascade over what must be walls. Small trees, scrub oak and locust, grow from cracks in the roof. Only the presence of the rail spur, ending abruptly 10 feet from the structure, suggests this wasn't always hidden. Rachel parts the vines carefully. Beneath them, poured concrete, institutional and brutal. A steel door, its surface pocked with rust but still intact, and beside the door, barely legible through corrosion and lichen, stenciled letters. Section 7, Research Division. Her pulse quickens. She's never seen reference to any Section 7 in the historical documents. The Millfield Ironworks had rolling mills, blast furnaces, administrative buildings, all accounted for in the archives. The door's lock has surrendered to time, the mechanism frozen and broken. Rachel pushes. The hinges shriek, the sound shockingly loud in the afternoon quiet. The door swings inward 6 inches, 12. Enough. Cool air breathes out from the darkness inside, dry and still, carrying the scent of concrete dust and something else she can't immediately identify. Rachel clicks on her headlamp and steps through. The beam reveals a reception area frozen in time. A metal desk, its surface filmed with dust. Filing cabinets along one wall, drawers closed. A bulletin board, empty except for yellowed pins. The floor is linoleum tile, buckled in places but intact. Beyond the reception area, a corridor extends into darkness. Institutional green paint peels in long strips from cinder block walls. Electrical conduits run along the ceiling. Every 10 feet, a doorway. Rachel photographs everything methodically, her headlamp creating harsh shadows. The first room, empty except for built-in shelves. The second, some kind of laboratory setup, steel counters bolted to walls. A sink with separate faucets labeled hot, cold, and decon. Her breathing sounds too loud in the enclosed space. The temperature is noticeably cooler than outside, the concrete and earth insulation preserving a constant underground chill. The third doorway opens into a larger room, maybe 20 feet square. Rachel's headlamp beam sweeps across the floor and stops. They sit in a circle, 11 figures in uniforms of royal blue and gold. The fabric has faded in the sealed darkness, turned gray-blue, but she recognizes the design from the photograph in her bag. Millfield Cavaliers. Their bodies are desiccated, mummified by the dry, stable environment, skin drawn tight over bone, features still eerily recognizable as human. They face inward, toward something in the center of their circle. Rachel's camera drops from numb fingers, catches on its neck strap. The headlamp beam shakes as her hands begin to tremble. They look peaceful. That's what her brain keeps circling back to, trying to process. Their positions are deliberate, sitting cross-legged, hands resting on knees. No signs of struggle or panic, like they're meditating, like they chose to be here. She forces herself to breathe, to think, to move. The headlamp illuminates what they surround, a deflated soccer ball, its leather cracked and split. 11 small rectangles arranged in a spoke pattern. She crouches, careful not to disturb anything, and sees their driver's licenses, their plastic yellowed but readable. Photographs clipped to a wire stretched between 2 chairs. Black and white images of Millfield from decades ago. The mill in full operation, smoke rising from stacks. And beneath the photographs, weighted down by what looks like a wrench, papers. A document, handwritten in black ink that's faded to brown. Rachel's journalistic training fights through the shock. Don't touch, document, preserve the scene. She photographs everything from multiple angles, her headlamp and camera flash creating a surreal strobe effect in the underground chamber. The 11 figures, the circle's contents, the walls, bare concrete except for scratches near the floor that might be marks or might be nothing. Her hands shake so badly she has to brace the camera against her chest. One of the figures still wears a visible number on his uniform, 7. She remembers from the articles. That was Derek Holloway, the captain, the one whose pregnant wife found the empty locker room. Rachel backs out of the room slowly, unable to look away from the circle. In the corridor she runs. Outside, the June air feels impossibly fresh and alive. She gulps it down, her stomach churning. Her phone, she fumbles it from her pocket, one bar of signal, wavering. The 911 dispatcher sounds bored until Rachel's words penetrate. I found them, the soccer team, the ones who disappeared. They're in a bunker at the old ironworks, all 11. They've been here the whole time. While she waits, crouched beside her bike at the fence gap, Rachel looks back at the hillside. The bunker is invisible from this angle, completely swallowed by vegetation and time. 34 years. They sat there for 34 years while the world searched rivers and woods, while families aged and broke and learned to live with absence, while theories multiplied and faded and became dark internet legends. And they were here, all along, 2 miles from the stadium where they vanished, arranged in their deliberate circle with their secrets at the center. Sirens begin to wail in the distance, drawing closer. Rachel's scream echoes off concrete walls, dying in the sealed chamber. She stumbles backward, her shoulder hitting the doorframe hard enough to send pain shooting down her arm. The flashlight rolls across the floor, its beams spinning wildly. Blue fabric, withered skin, empty eye sockets, hands folded in laps. She forces herself to breathe. In through nose, out through mouth, the way her cycling coach taught her for panic moments on mountain descents. Her hand finds the door frame. Real, solid. She's not hallucinating. The flashlight beam settles, pointing at the far wall. Rachel retrieves it with shaking fingers, keeping the light aimed low, at the floor. She's documented car crashes for highway safety campaigns, photographed the aftermath of a house fire in Scranton. She knows how to function when her stomach is rebelling. But this... She counts the figures in the circle. 11, all seated cross-legged facing inward. Their uniforms, royal blue jerseys with gold trim, white shorts now yellowed, hang loose on desiccated frames. The dry, cool air and sealed environment have preserved them in a state between decay and mummification. Skin stretched tight over bones, hair still attached to skulls. Faces collapsed inward, but recognizable as human. Rachel's photographer instincts kick in before her fear can override them. She needs to document this, now, before she loses her nerve. She raises her camera, adjusting settings for the low light. The viewfinder creates distance, transforms horror into composition. Through the lens, she can process what she's seeing. The players haven't been arranged. Their positions look natural, voluntary. No restraints visible on wrists or ankles, no signs of violence, no bullet holes in uniforms, no obvious trauma to skulls. They look like a team in a huddle that forgot to stand up. One figure sits slightly apart from the others, broader shoulders, jersey number 7 visible on his back. The mummified face tilts upward slightly, as if he'd been speaking when the end came. Rachel circles the room slowly, camera clicking. Each player's jersey bears a different number. She recognizes some from her research. Number 19 must be Jimmy Patterson. The two seated side by side, numbers 22 and 24, have similar bone structure. The Vargas brothers. At the center of their circle, the objects she glimpsed earlier come into clearer focus. A. Soccer ball. Leather cracked and split. Completely deflated. 11 driver's licenses arranged in a perfect spoke pattern, their plastic yellowed but readable. She zooms in. Derek Holloway's photo stares up at her, a young man's confident smile frozen in 1987. Vincent Chen, Luis Vargas, Mateo Vargas, Jimmy Patterson. All the names from the memorial plaque, from the newspaper archives, from the family's desperate missing posters. Beside the licenses, a stack of black and white photographs. She kneels carefully, avoiding disturbing anything, and focuses her lens. The photos show the Millfield Ironworks in its prime, smokestacks billowing, parking lots full of cars, men in hard hats streaming through gates. The town before the fall. And beneath it all, weighed down by a rusted bolt, pages of handwritten text. The paper is yellowed to the color of old bone, but the ink, black ballpoint, remains legible. She can read the title from where she kneels. The Hollowtown Project. Rachel's hands steady. This is it. This is why they're here. She photographs the document from multiple angles, adjusting exposure to capture every word. The handwriting is precise, almost mechanical in its consistency. Someone who took their time, someone who wanted to be understood. The opening lines are visible in her viewfinder. If you are reading this, we have been found. We have been gone long enough for the truth to matter more than the loss. We are Derek Holloway, Vincent Chen, Mateo Vargas, Luis Vargas, Jimmy Patterson. 11 names, the entire roster. Rachel pulls back, widening the frame to capture the full scene. The circle of bodies, the artifacts, the document. This is what investigators will need. Context, relationships, the deliberate arrangement of everything. She stands, legs unsteady, and begins photographing the room itself. The walls are bare concrete, no windows, a ventilation grate in the ceiling, long dormant. In the far corner, a metal bucket, a folded tarp, evidence of human presence beyond the final arrangement. Near the door, she finds something that stops her cold. Scratched into the concrete wall, about waist-high, 11 sets of initials form a vertical column. D.H., V.C., M.V., L.V., J.P. 7 others she'll need the roster to decipher. Beneath them, carved with what must have been a key or coin, 2 sentences. We were here. We were real. Remember us. The words blur. Rachel realizes she's crying, hot tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. These weren't victims of violence. They weren't kidnapped or murdered by a stranger. They walked in here themselves. She photographs the inscription, then retreats to the corridor. Her legs give out halfway to the entrance, and she sits hard on the concrete floor, head between her knees. The camera dangles from its strap. 34 years. The families have been waiting 34 years. Sarah Holloway raised a daughter alone. Jimmy Patterson's mother died of cancer, never knowing. The Vargas parents probably returned to Guatemala or passed away themselves. All that grief, that uncertainty, that desperate hope that maybe, somehow, the men were alive somewhere. And they've been here. 2 miles from Riverside Field. 2 miles from home. Rachel pulls out her phone. No signal this deep in the structure. She'll have to go outside. She forces herself back to her feet, takes one last look at the chamber. The beam of her flashlight catches the deflated soccer ball, and she understands the symbolism. The game they won. The victory that preceded whatever decision they made. In the reception area, she has enough signal for the call. 911, what's your emergency? Rachel's voice sounds strange to her own ears, too calm, shock smoothing the edges. My name is Rachel Kimura. I'm at the old Millfield Ironworks, about 2 miles east of town. I found the missing soccer players from 1989, all 11 of them. The dispatcher's silence stretches long enough that Rachel checks if the call dropped. Ma'am, can you repeat that? The Millfield Cavaliers, the team that disappeared 34 years ago. They're here. They're dead. I'm looking at their bodies right now. Are you in danger? Is anyone else present? No, just me. And them. Rachel laughs, a jagged sound. Just me and the ghosts. The dispatcher's voice sharpens, professional and brisk. Stay on the line. I'm dispatching units to your location. Do not touch anything. Do not leave the area. Can you give me your exact position? Rachel provides the details mechanically. The fence gap, the rail spur, the bunker entrance. She can already hear sirens in the distance, that particular urgent wail that means multiple vehicles. She walks back outside, into June sunshine that feels obscene in its normalcy. The ironworks sprawls around her, rusty and indifferent. Birds sing in the overgrown trees. Below ground, 11 men wait in their circle. Rachel sits on a chunk of concrete and watches the access road. The first police cruiser appears within 5 minutes, then another, then an ambulance that won't be needed for rescue. Within 20 minutes, the forgotten corner of the Millfield Ironworks transforms into organized chaos. Yellow tape, officers in uniform, plainclothes detectives, a fire truck for lighting. A state police investigator approaches, a woman in her 40s with gray-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Ms. Kimura, I'm Detective Sarah Cortez. You made the call? I found them. They're in the bunker, about 70 yards that way. Rachel points. How many bodies? 11, all arranged in a circle. They're preserved. And there's a document, in the middle, something about a project. Detective Cortez's expression doesn't change, but Rachel sees her hand tighten on her radio. Show me. They walk together, Rachel retracing her steps for what she knows will be the first of many times. Officers follow, carrying portable lights and evidence cases. At the bunker entrance, Cortez pauses. Wait here. Rachel watches them enter, sees the flashlight beams cut through the darkness. She hears a sharp intake of breath, someone swearing softly. 20 minutes later, Cortez emerges, her face pale beneath her tan. We need to call the FBI, she tells her sergeant, and someone track down whoever worked the original investigation, if they're still alive. That bad? That's strange. Cortez looks at Rachel. You didn't touch anything? Move anything? Just took photographs. For documentation. I'll need those, and a full statement. You're going to be here a while. As the sun begins its descent toward the western hills, the ironworks fills with people. Forensic techs in white suits, federal agents in dark ones, a mobile crime lab that parks as close as the overgrown vegetation allows. Rachel sits in the back of an ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders despite the warmth, and watches them work. Someone brings her water. Someone else asks preliminary questions, taking notes. She thinks about the document waiting in that sealed room, the answers that Derek Holloway wrote in careful script before he and his teammates sat down in their final circle. Tomorrow, the families will know, the town will know, the world will know. But tonight, as technicians set up generators and evidence lights turn the bunker entrance into a stage set, the secret belongs to the dead and the woman who found them. Rachel's phone buzzes. Text messages from friends who've seen the police activity, asking if she's okay. She doesn't answer. She's not sure what okay means anymore. Inside the bunker, someone is photographing the same things she did. The uniforms, the licenses, the inscription on the wall. Professional documentation to supplement her desperate amateur record. But Rachel knows her images will matter in ways that will reach beyond the sterile language of reports. They will be proof and witness, and perhaps a small mercy for families who had spent decades in limbo. She sips the water, breathes, and watches the lights play across the bunker mouth while the town leans forward to meet its long-buried past. The state police crime scene van arrived first, tires crunching on 40 years of accumulated gravel and rust at the abandoned Millfield Ironworks. Rachel Kimura stood 50 yards from the bunker entrance, her bicycle propped against a corroded conveyor belt, her hands still trembling around her camera. She'd stopped screaming. That had ended somewhere between the bunker door and the fence gap, between the impossible circle of bodies and the June sunlight that now felt obscene in its normalcy. Now she just waited, watching unmarked sedans and official vehicles converge on coordinates she'd given to a dispatcher who'd initially thought she was reporting vandalism or a homeless encampment. Detective Sarah Cortez emerged from the lead sedan before it fully stopped. She was perhaps 45, her face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd worked Western Pennsylvania homicides long enough to develop immunity to surprise. That immunity shattered the moment Rachel explained what waited in the third room. "You're certain?" Cortez asked for the third time, her pen hovering over a notebook. 11 bodies, uniforms, royal blue and gold. Rachel's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "They're sitting in a circle." Cortez looked toward the bunker, half hidden by sumac and wild grape that had reclaimed the hillside. "You went inside alone?" "I document abandoned sites. I didn't expect." Rachel swallowed hard. Nobody knew this structure existed. Within 20 minutes, the ironworks transformed into controlled chaos. Yellow tape cordoned off a 100-yard perimeter. A forensic team in white Tyvek suits assembled portable lights and evidence kits. Pennsylvania State Police Captain Mike Reardon, who'd driven from the barracks in Kittanning, stood with Cortez reviewing Rachel's initial photographs on her camera's small screen. "Jesus Christ," Reardon whispered. The images showed what Rachel's verbal description couldn't convey: the eerie preservation, the deliberate arrangement, the terrible patience of bodies that had waded through administrations and decades. Cortez zoomed in on a detail in one photograph. "Is that a document?" Rachel nodded. Center of the circle, weighted down with their driver's licenses. By noon, the scene had escalated beyond local jurisdiction. FBI Special Agent Marcus Chen, no relation to Vincent Chen, though the coincidence would haunt him later, arrived with a cold case unit from Pittsburgh. He'd pulled the 1989 Millfield Cavaliers file during the drive, speed reading 34 years of dead ends and bureaucratic surrender. The first entry team wore respirators and moved through the bunker with methodical caution, documenting everything before disturbing anything. Rachel watched their helmet-mounted cameras feed to monitors in a mobile command center, seeing again the reception desk with its 1960s-era typewriter, the corridor with institutional green walls, the rooms that had waited in perfect silence. Then the third room filled the screens. Even hardened investigators fell quiet. The 11 figures sat with an almost meditative stillness, their mummified hands resting on their knees, their faces tilted slightly downward, as if in contemplation or prayer. Their uniforms had faded but remained identifiable. Royal blue jerseys with gold numbers, white shorts, high socks striped in team colors. "No visible trauma," the team leader reported through his radio. "No signs of restraint or struggle. They're positioned like they sat down deliberately and never got up." Agent Chen leaned closer to the monitor, studying the arrangement. "What's that in the center?" The camera operator zoomed in. A deflated soccer ball, its leather panels cracked and separated. 11. Pennsylvania driver's licenses arranged in a perfect spoke pattern, their laminated surfaces yellowed but intact. Photographs showing the Millfield Ironworks in full operation, smokestacks breathing fire, parking lots jammed with workers' cars, the prosperity that died in 1982. And the document. Multiple pages, handwritten in blue ink that had faded to ghost traces on cheap lined paper. The top sheet bore a title in careful block letters: The Hollowtown Project. "Bag everything," Chen ordered. "I want those papers readable within the hour." The forensic photographer worked with painful slowness, capturing every angle before the evidence technician, a slight woman named Dr. Patricia Ruiz, approached the circle. She knelt between two bodies,
her gloved hand steady as she lifted the first page. "It's signed," she said softly. "All 11 of them." The signatures ran down the right margin in different hands, some confident, others shaky. Derek Holloway, Vincent Chen, Mateo Vargas, Luis Vargas, Jimmy Patterson. 8 others whose names had become local legend, whispered in bars and memorialized on bronze plaques. Outside, Rachel sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders despite the 70-degree afternoon. A paramedic had checked her vitals, declared her physically fine, and retreated to give her space. She stared at her camera, at the images that would define the rest of her life. A sedan with Pennsylvania plates pulled up to the perimeter. An older woman emerged, moving with the careful dignity of someone who'd learned to carry grief like a chronic condition. Sarah Holloway was 61 now, her hair silver, her face lined with decades of waiting and refusing to stop waiting. Detective Cortez intercepted her before she could approach the tape. "Ma'am, this is an active scene." "My husband is in there," Sarah said quietly. "Derek Holloway. I've been waiting 34 years for someone to find him." Cortez's professional mask cracked. She glanced at Captain Reardon, who nodded. "She deserves to know," he said. They brought Sarah to the command center, sat her in a folding chair, offered water she didn't drink. Agent Chen explained what they'd found with careful, clinical language, but Sarah didn't need euphemisms. She'd imagined every possibility across 34 years: murder, abduction, voluntary disappearance, mass grave, secret burial. She hadn't imagined this. "They sat down together?" Sarah asked. "All 11? That's what it looks like. We're waiting for the medical examiner, but the preliminary assessment suggests they died from hypoxia. The bunker's ventilation appears to have been deliberately sealed." Sarah's hands folded in her lap, trembling slightly. Derek hated closed spaces. He wouldn't. She stopped, reconsidering decades of certainty. "What was that project you mentioned?" Chen hesitated, then retrieved a tablet showing high-resolution scans of the handwritten pages. "We're still analyzing the document, but it references something called the Hollowtown Project. Does that mean anything to you?" Sarah shook her head, but something flickered in her expression. Not recognition, but the ghost of old suspicions. Conspiracy theories she'd dismissed as grief-driven paranoia. Inside the bunker, Dr. Ruiz had finished documenting the document's position and was carefully transferring the pages to archival sleeves. The forensic photographer captured close-ups of Derek Holloway's handwriting, precise, methodical, the script of someone recording something too important to rush. The first page began simply, "We write this knowing no one may ever read it. Or perhaps someone will read it when we're too long gone to see justice done. Either way, the truth must be recorded." By mid-afternoon, the bodies were being prepared for careful extraction. The medical examiner, Dr. Robert Klein, had arrived from Allegheny County and established a preliminary timeline based on preservation conditions and environmental factors. "The sealed environment explains the mummification," he told Chen. "Low humidity, stable temperature, minimal oxygen once they depleted it. It's essentially what ancient Egyptians achieved artificially." "How long did they survive after entering?" Klein studied the body's positions, their facial expressions, the absence of desperate clawing or panic. "Hours, maybe. Once oxygen levels dropped below a certain threshold, they would have lost consciousness. Death followed relatively peacefully." "Peacefully," Chen repeated, the word tasting wrong. By sunset, news helicopters circled the ironworks despite FAA attempts to establish a no-fly zone. The story had leaked. 11 bodies, 34-year-old mystery, the most famous cold case in Pennsylvania history suddenly hot again. Rachel Kimura sat with Sarah Holloway in the command center.
Two women bound by discovery and loss. Sarah studied the photographs Rachel had taken, seeing Derek's mummified face for the first time. "He looks calm," Sarah whispered. "I thought he'd look afraid." "They all looked that way," Rachel said, "like they'd made peace with something." Outside, floodlights illuminated the bunker entrance as the extraction team prepared to move the first body. Agent Chen received a call from Washington. The director wanted hourly updates. The Attorney General was briefed, and a dozen agencies were fighting over jurisdiction. None of that mattered to the woman who'd arrived pregnant 34 years ago to find an empty locker room, who'd raised a daughter named Hope while refusing to believe in closure without truth. Inside the evidence tent, a forensic document specialist carefully separated the pages of Derek Holloway's final statement. The prose was dense, angry, heartbroken. It referenced documents and dates, named names, described a conspiracy so methodical it had turned an entire town into a laboratory. The specialist reached the final page, where Derek's handwriting grew larger, more urgent. "We are already ghosts. This town is already dead. They took our future and watched us die slowly. We won't give them the satisfaction." The specialist looked up at Agent Chen, her face pale. "You need to read this, all of it, right now." Chen took the pages, began reading, and understood why 11 men had walked away from their lives into a sealed room to die on their own terms. The truth was worse than murder. It was abandonment disguised as policy, cruelty dressed as research, evil hiding behind spreadsheets and academic language, and it had a name: the Hollowtown Project. The preliminary forensic report arrived at 6:47 a.m., sliding across the conference table in the county administration building like an unwanted verdict. Special Agent Marcus Chen picked it up with steady hands, though the coffee in his other hand had gone cold an hour ago. Around him, the emergency task force assembled overnight. Detective Sarah Cortez, Captain Mike Reardon, 2 state police forensic specialists, and the county medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Vance, waited in the fluorescent silence. Chen read the first page twice before speaking. "Cause of death is hypoxia," he said quietly. "Oxygen deprivation. All 11 subjects died within approximately 6 to 8 hours of entering the sealed environment." Dr. Vance nodded, her face drawn from the night's work. The bunker's ventilation system was deliberately blocked from the inside. Someone stuffed the intake ducts with cloth. We found fragments of what appears to be jersey material. The space became an airtight chamber. Sarah Cortez leaned forward. "Signs of struggle? Panic?" "None." Vance's voice carried a professional detachment that barely masked her discomfort. "The bodies show no defensive wounds, no restraint marks, no indicators of physical conflict. Their positions suggest they remained seated throughout. Blood oxygen levels and tissue analysis indicate they lost consciousness gradually, peacefully, like falling asleep." The word hung in the air, obscene in its gentleness. "Toxicology?" Chen asked. "Elevated blood alcohol in 3 subjects, consistent with post-game celebration. No sedatives, no narcotics, no poisons, just beer." Vance pulled out a photograph of the mummified remains as they'd been found. The environmental conditions in that bunker were perfect for natural mummification. Cool, dry, sealed. No insects, no scavengers, minimal bacterial activity. They've been sitting there for 34 years in almost perfect preservation. Captain Reardon cleared his throat. "So they walked in there voluntarily and just sat down to die. That's what the evidence suggests." Vance's finger traced the circle formation in the photograph. "Their positioning is too deliberate to be accidental. This was organized." Chen opened the second folder, the one that had kept him awake since midnight. Inside were high-resolution scans of the document found at the circle's center, photographed in meticulous detail by Rachel Kimura before the forensic team arrived.
"We need to talk about this," he said, spreading the pages across the table. The handwriting was precise, almost architectural in its clarity. The title sat centered at the top of the first page. The Hollow Town Project, a final testimony. Below it, 11 signatures, each name matching a driver's license from the circle. Derek Holloway's signature appeared first, bold and captain-like. Vincent Chen's was smaller, careful. The Vargas brothers had signed side by side. "It's a confession," Detective Cortez said, though her voice questioned the word even as she spoke it. "Or a manifesto." "It's an explanation," Chen corrected. He began reading aloud, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. "To whoever finds this, and we pray someone eventually will, we write this account so that our choice will be understood, not as an act of despair, but as an act of defiance. We are the Millfield Cavaliers. We are 11 men who loved this town enough to refuse to become what they designed us to be." The conference room fell silent, except for the hum of the ventilation system, a sound that now felt accusatory. Chen continued, the pages detailing Vincent Chen's discovery of the bunker in July 1989, his exploration of Section 7, the boxes of archived documents he'd found gathering dust in a storage room deeper in the facility. Papers stamped "Confidential" and "Behavioral Dynamics Corporation." Research protocols dated 1964 through 1978. Psychological assessment forms. Community observation logs. "Vincent brought the documents to me first," Derek's account read. "I didn't believe him. I thought it was Cold War paranoia, forgotten bureaucratic nonsense. So we spent 3 weeks verifying everything. We matched the research schedules to actual events in Millfield. We found the names of the consultants who had visited our town, psychologists and sociologists who observed us like rats in a cage. We traced the funding back through shell corporations to the Department of Defense." Chen paused, letting the words settle. Outside, through the window, the sun climbed over the Allegheny River Valley, indifferent and bright. "There's more," he said. "Pages of it. They documented everything they found. Names, dates, specific interventions designed to accelerate Millfield's economic collapse." Dr. Vance's coffee cup rattled slightly as she set it down. "You're saying the government deliberately destroyed this town? As an experiment?" "That's their claim." Chen's finger traced down the cramped handwriting. "According to this, the steel mill's closure wasn't market forces. It was engineered. Specific policies, media manipulation, strategic disinvestment. Behavioral Dynamics Corporation received funding to study controlled community decline, how American populations respond when their economic foundation is systematically removed." "That's insane," Reardon muttered. "Is it?" Cortez's voice cut sharp. "We ran psychological warfare programs for decades. MK Ultra, Tuskegee, Operation Northwoods. Why not this?" Chen turned to the final pages, where Derek's handwriting grew denser, more urgent. "We showed the documents to all 11 of us. Mateo cried when he understood that his parents came to America for a town that was already designed to fail. Jimmy saw that his mother's death, the cancer from mill chemicals that should have been cleaned up but weren't, was a data point in someone's study. Luis talked about burning the bunker down. Vincent wanted to go to the newspapers, but we knew the truth. No one would believe us. We're just mill workers and soccer players from a dying town no one cares about." The words struck like physical blows. So we made a different choice. We would disappear at our moment of greatest triumph, after a victory that reminded us who we could have been, and we would disappear in a way that demanded investigation. Our vanishing would be the anomaly that couldn't be ignored, and when someone finally found us, they would find this truth. They would be forced to look at what was done to us. Chen's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and continued. "We are not victims who gave up. We are soldiers who chose our battlefield. This town is already dead. They killed it slowly, methodically, scientifically. We refuse to become the final shambling evidence of their success. We choose agency over degradation. We choose mystery over defeat. We go as ghosts, and ghosts, they will learn, can haunt forever. The document concluded with practical details, how they'd planned the disappearance, disabled the security cameras, walked through the woods to the bunker, how Jimmy Patterson had calculated the oxygen depletion rate, how they'd arranged themselves in the circle, placed their licenses and the ball and the photographs of Millfield when it still thrived at the center as evidence. The final paragraph was dated September 23, 1989, 11:34 p.m. The shower is running in the locker room. Our clothes are folded in our lockers. Sarah will find my truck, my wedding ring, the onesie I bought for Hope. It will break her heart. That is the price we pay and the guilt we carry. But we go knowing that our disappearance will force the question, why? And that question will eventually lead here, to this room, to these words, to the documents that prove what was done. We were here. We were real. We were destroyed, deliberately. Remember us. Remember what they did. Make them answer. Chen set down the final page. His hands were shaking now. Dr. Vance broke the silence. We need to verify their claims, the documents they reference. Already have a team searching the bunker storage rooms, Chen said. Rachel Kimura mentioned file boxes in her initial statement. If they're still there, if they're real, Reardon said carefully. This becomes the biggest government accountability case in decades. If they're real, Cortez countered, it means these men were telling the truth. It means Millfield was murdered. It means every family that lost a job, every kid who grew up in poverty, every closed business and foreclosed home, all of it was deliberate. The weight of that settled over the room like ash. Chen's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and stood abruptly. Forensics found something in the storage area, boxes of archived materials, hundreds of documents. They moved as a unit, filing out of the conference room toward the waiting vehicles. The morning traffic in Millfield was light. It always was. Residents going through motions in a town that had forgotten how to thrive. At the ironworks, the forensic tent glowed white against the industrial decay. Inside, a specialist named Jennifer Oakes knelt beside 3 document boxes, wearing latex gloves, her face pale. "Tell me," Chen said. Oakes held up a manila folder stamped with faded red letters. Confidential, Behavioral Dynamics Corp., Hollowtown Initiative, Millfield, PA. "It's all here," she whispered. "Research protocols, observation schedules, community psychological profiles dating back to 1964, economic intervention strategies, media placement reports." She opened the folder, revealing typed pages and handwritten notes. Agent Chen, they documented everything. Every policy recommendation they made to accelerate the mill's closure. Every artificial barrier they created to prevent economic diversification. They have charts tracking depression rates, alcoholism, domestic violence, tracked like test results. Chen took the folder with hands that felt numb. Inside was a memorandum dated March 1967. Subject: Millfield Baseline Psychological Assessment. The community demonstrates typical Rust Belt resilience and social cohesion. Recommend accelerated stress application through economic isolation and infrastructure neglect. Estimated timeline to measurable social deterioration, 15 to 20 years. "My God," Cortez breathed, reading over his shoulder. Another document, stamped 1973, detailed Media Narrative Management. How certain stories about Millfield's decline were planted in regional newspapers to create a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. The conference room at the FBI's Pittsburgh field office falls into stunned silence. Agent Marcus Chen sets down the scanned pages of Derek Holloway's document, his hands steady despite the tremor in his voice moments before.
Through the fourth-floor windows, the city stretches toward the three rivers, indifferent to the revelation unfolding in this fluorescent-lit space. Detective Sarah Cortez breaks the silence first. We need to verify every claim in that document before this goes public. It's already going public, Captain Reardon says, gesturing toward the window. Outside, news vans from Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, and Cleveland occupy the parking lot. Rachel Kimura's photographs hit the internet 6 hours ago. Every outlet between here and Washington is running the story. Agent Chen picks up a folder marked with red classification stamps. I made some calls while forensics processed the scene. Behavioral Dynamics Corporation existed. Department of Defense contractor, 1958 to 1974. Officially dissolved after congressional hearings into ethical violations. He opens the folder, revealing photocopied documents. They ran psychological studies on populations without informed consent. MK Ultra adjacent work. The company's dissolution was part of a broader cleanup after Watergate. That doesn't prove they experimented on Millfield, Dr. Vance counters. The medical examiner stands near a whiteboard covered in timeline notations. These men believed something, that's clear, but belief doesn't equal truth. Rachel Kimura sits in the corner, her camera bag at her feet. She hasn't left the building since giving her statement 8 hours ago. The documents I photographed in the bunker, the ones in those file boxes, they looked official. Government letterhead, typed reports with signatures and dates. Which we're analyzing now, Chen says. He nods to a junior agent who dims the lights and activates a projector. Scanned images fill the wall. Faded typescript on cream-colored paper. Letterhead reading, Behavioral Dynamics Corporation, Applied Psychology Division. The first document is dated March 1964. Chen reads aloud. Project designation, Hollowtown. Site selection rationale. Millfield, Pennsylvania presents optimal conditions for controlled longitudinal study. Population size manageable, 12,400. Economic base vulnerable to targeted intervention. Geographic isolation, sufficient to limit contamination from external variables. Sarah Cortez's pen hovers over her notepad. Targeted intervention. Chen advances to the next image. Here's a memo from June 1967. His voice flattens, professional distance barely masking disgust. Recommending specific policy adjustments to accelerate mill closure. They're discussing tax incentives, environmental regulation timing, even suggesting which city council members to approach with consultation fees. Jesus Christ, Reardon mutters. The images continue. A psychological assessment grid tracking baseline community cohesion metrics. Observation logs noting increased alcoholism rates, domestic violence statistics, suicide attempts, all clinically recorded, analyzed, graphed. One document proposes introducing economic stress amplifiers to study their cascading effects on family structures. Rachel feels bile rise in her throat. She photographs ruins because they're beautiful in their decay, testaments to human ambition and inevitable entropy. This is different. This is deliberate destruction, measured with calipers and recorded in triplicate. Chen stops on a document from October 1978. This one mentions establishing a long-term monitoring station at the Millfield Ironworks site. Specifically references Section 7, Auxiliary Research Facility, access restricted to senior project staff. He looks around the room. That's the bunker. So they were still observing the town a decade after the mill closed, Cortez says, watching the consequences of what they'd engineered. Watching us die, comes a voice from the doorway. Everyone turns. Sarah Holloway stands in the threshold, Hope beside her. Neither woman was invited to this briefing, but no one moves to stop them as they enter. Sarah's face carries the exhaustion of 34 years compressed into 48 hours. Hope's expression is harder, a journalist's mask barely concealing rage. Mrs. Holloway, Chen begins, We haven't finished. My husband's letter says Vincent Chen found these documents in July 1989. Sarah's voice is steady, precise. That's 2 months before they disappeared. 2 months to verify, to plan, to decide their lives were worth less than exposing this. She moves to the projected images. Show me proof he was wrong. Show me evidence this was delusion or conspiracy theory. No one speaks. Hope steps forward. I've spent the last 6 hours in the archives at the Millfield Library, cross-referencing dates in my father's document with newspaper reports, town council minutes, economic data. She pulls a laptop from her bag, sets it on the table. Every intervention they describe. I found the public record, the tax policy changes, the environmental citations that delayed equipment upgrades, the state contracts that went to competitors in Johnstown and Erie instead of local suppliers. She opens a spreadsheet, projects it beside her father's letter. Here's the mill's profitability by quarter, 1964 to 1982. Notice the pattern? Profitable operation until specific policy changes, then sudden decline. Recovery attempts blocked by regulatory delays. Exactly as their documents outline. Dr. Vance leans in, studying the data. This could be confirmation bias. Finding patterns because you're looking for them. Could be, Hope agrees. Except I also found this. She opens a scanned image. A photograph from the Millfield Gazette, August 1971. Front page story about a Carnegie Mellon research team conducting a community health and well-being study. 6-month project. Extensive interviews, psychological assessments of residents. She zooms in on the research team's faces. Third from the left. Dr. Lawrence Casper, lead investigator. Another scan. A Behavioral Dynamics Corporation internal memo from September 1971. Dr. Lawrence Casper reporting, successful completion of Phase 3 baseline assessments in Millfield. The room absorbs this. The same man, different contexts, 8 years into the project. They were there, Sarah says quietly, in our town, in our homes, asking questions, taking notes, and we thought they cared. Chen advances through more documents. Observation reports from the 1980s noting accelerating social deterioration consistent with projections. A 1985 analysis celebrating the successful 12-year trajectory of controlled decline. Recommendations for maintaining monitoring through 1995 to capture complete generational impact data. Rachel finally speaks. The 11 men who died in that bunker, they knew all this. They understood their entire lives were someone's experiment. Not just theirs, Cortez adds. Everyone in Millfield, every family that lost income, every kid who grew up in poverty, every person who turned to drugs or alcohol or just gave up. All of it measured and recorded like lab rats in a maze. Captain Reardon stands, paces to the window. We need to trace everyone involved. The researchers, the administrators, whoever authorized funding. This wasn't some rogue scientist. This was institutional. Most of them are dead, Chen says. Behavioral dynamics dissolved 49 years ago. Staff dispersed, records incomplete. He pauses. But some might still be alive, in their 80s or 90s, but alive. Then we find them, Sarah says. Her hand finds Hope's. We find every person who knew what was being done and said nothing. We make them answer. The junior agent who's been quietly working a laptop raises his hand. Sir, I've been running names from the documents through federal databases, cross-referencing with Social Security records, pension files. He swallows. Dr. Lawrence Casper, age 93, receiving government pension. Last known address, Laurel Heights Assisted Living, Philadelphia. The room freezes. Philadelphia, Reardon says slowly. 2 hours from here. He's been 2 hours away this whole time. Chen's phone buzzes. He reads the message, his expression darkening. Forensics team found something else in the bunker. A second room, behind a locked door the players couldn't access. Storage area. He looks up. Filled with observation equipment, cameras, recording devices, filing cabinets full of notes. Someone was using that bunker as an active monitoring station through at least 1988. Casper, Sarah breathes. He was still watching. After the project officially ended, after the corporation dissolved, he was still watching my town die. Hope's fingers fly across her laptop. Looking him up now. Lawrence Casper, Ph.D., Applied Behavioral Psychology. Published extensively in the 60s on community stress response. Consultant to multiple government agencies. She clicks through academic papers, curriculum vitae, photographs. Last publication was 1989, then nothing, like he disappeared. Into retirement, Chen says, hiding in plain sight. The projector flickers as the junior agent pulls up a new document. A letter, dated September 1989, from the Department of Defense to Behavioral Dynamics successor entities, ordering the immediate cessation of all Hollow Town observation activities and destruction of monitoring infrastructure. September 1989. Cortez notes, the same month the team disappeared. They were ordered to stop watching, Rachel says, but the bunker was still operational, the storage room still full of equipment. Chen's jaw tightens. Casper didn't stop. Even after official shutdown, he kept monitoring. This wasn't about research anymore. This was obsession. Sarah stares at Casper's photograph on Hope's laptop. An elderly man with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses, smiling at a retirement community event. Ordinary, forgettable. The architect of her town's destruction, living comfortably on a government pension. Vincent found those documents in July, she says. Casper would have known. If he was still monitoring, if he had cameras, observation equipment, he would have known someone accessed the bunker. The implications settle like frost. He knew they knew, Hope whispers. 2 months before they disappeared, he knew they'd discovered the truth. Agent Chen stands abruptly. I'm sending a team to Philadelphia tonight. We bring Casper in for questioning immediately. On what grounds? Reardon asks. Everything in these documents is decades old. Statute of limitations. The 11 men are dead, Chen interrupts. Died in a facility connected to his research. That gives us probable cause to bring Casper in and to secure any remaining evidence. The fluorescent lights of the National Archives reading room hummed softly, casting pale light across row after row of metal filing cabinets that stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Rachel Kimura sat at a long wooden table, latex gloves protecting her hands as she turned brittle pages with practiced care. 3 weeks had passed since she'd found the bunker. 3 weeks since her photographs had transformed a cold case into a national reckoning. Across from her, Hope Holloway worked through a different box, her movements quick and precise. At 33, Derek's daughter had inherited his jawline and her mother's guarded determination. She'd been doing this kind of work her entire adult life, chasing fragments of truth through dusty archives and FOIA requests, but never with answers this close. The archivist who'd retrieved their materials, a thin woman named Margaret with silver hair pulled back severely, lingered nearby, pretending to organize card items while clearly monitoring what secrets they might uncover. Here, Hope said, her voice tight. She slid a folder across the table. Rachel opened it carefully. The letterhead read, Behavioral Dynamics Corporation, Consultation Division, McLean, Virginia. The date, March 15th, 1964. Subject, Initial Site Assessment, Millfield, Pennsylvania. Population, 12,400, 1960 census. Primary employment, Millfield Ironworks, 4,100 workers. Secondary, service industries supporting mill economy. Demographics, 89% white, 8% Hispanic Latino, 2% black, 1% other. Educational attainment, 67% high school or less. Site selected based on geographic isolation. Economic dependence on single industry,
limited media coverage, and demographic homogeneity facilitating baseline behavioral measurement. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. The clinical language made people sound like laboratory specimens. "Keep reading," Hope said. The next page detailed the intervention protocol. Tax incentives quietly redirected to neighboring counties. Environmental regulations enforced selectively, making mill modernization prohibitively expensive. Union negotiations sabotaged through planted informants. Media consultants coaching local newspaper editors toward defeatist narratives about inevitable industrial decline. Nothing illegal, nothing prosecutable. Just a systematic, invisible campaign to ensure Millfield's slow death. "Jesus," Rachel whispered. Margaret the archivist moved closer. "Finding what you need?" "More than we wanted," Hope said without looking up. Over the next 4 hours, they assembled the architecture of a nightmare. Behavioral Dynamics Corporation had been a legitimate defense contractor, employing psychologists and sociologists to study how American communities might respond to various crises. The work was supposed to help prepare civil defense strategies for nuclear attack or Soviet invasion. But somewhere in the classified shadows, the research had twisted into something else. Rachel found the smoking gun in Box 47, marked BDC HTP Observational Data 1965 to 1978. Monthly reports from field observers stationed in Millfield. Researchers posing as urban planners, visiting professors, even a Lutheran minister who'd served at St. Mark's for 3 years. They documented everything: suicide rates, divorce rates, alcohol consumption, church attendance, voting patterns, measuring the psychological deterioration of a community being systematically strangled. One report from November 1971 included photographs. Rachel recognized Millfield's Main Street, still prosperous then. The researcher had annotated the image. Subject population exhibits moderate stress indicators. Recommend continuation of current intervention levels. They were watching the whole time, Hope said, her voice hollow. Taking notes while people lost their jobs, while families fell apart. Rachel pulled another folder. Inside were medical records, aggregated data on depression diagnoses, prescription rates, emergency room visits for domestic violence. The Millfield Clinic, where her mother had taken Derek for a broken wrist when he was 12, had been secretly funneling anonymized patient data to Behavioral Dynamics. Dr. Edmund Vickers had signed off on the data transfers. The same Dr. Vickers who'd delivered Hope in March 1990, who'd attended Derek's memorial service, who died of natural causes in 2018. "My mother trusted him," Hope said, reading over Rachel's shoulder. "We all did." The trail led deeper. Congressional testimony from 1975, when behavioral dynamics was briefly investigated during the church committee hearings on intelligence abuses. The CEO had testified that all behavioral research programs had been terminated in 1974. He'd lied under oath, but the documents proving it had been classified until 2019. By then, everyone involved was dead or senile. Rachel found references to other sites, not just Millfield. The report mentioned comparative analysis with similar projects in Gary, Indiana, Youngstown, Ohio, and Flint, Michigan, towns that had also been selected as laboratories for studying orchestrated decline. "How many?" Hope asked. "How many places did they destroy?" Before Rachel could answer, her phone vibrated. A text from Agent Marcus Chen. "Found him. Dr. Lawrence Casper, age 101, Laurel Heights Retirement Community, Philadelphia. Going in tonight. Thought you'd want to know." Hope read the message over her shoulder, then immediately started packing her materials back into their archival boxes. "We're going," she said. It wasn't a question. Rachel nodded. "I'll drive." They returned the boxes to Margaret, who processed their departure with bureaucratic efficiency, unaware she'd just helped expose one of the darkest secrets in American psychological research. The drive to Philadelphia took 6 hours through darkening autumn evening. Hope spent most of it on her laptop, pulling everything she could find about Dr. Lawrence Kasper. He published extensively in the 60s, she said, scrolling through academic databases. Behavioral modification, community psychology, stress response in closed populations. Then nothing after 1974. Just disappeared from the literature, like he had something to hide, Rachel said. They arrived at Laurel Heights just before midnight. The retirement community occupied a converted Victorian mansion in a quiet Philadelphia suburb, its windows glowing warm against the November chill. FBI vehicles clustered in the parking lot, unmarked but obvious. Agent Chen met them at the entrance. He looked like he hadn't slept since the bunker discovery. "He's in the common room," Chen said, "and he's not what I expected." They followed him through halls decorated with bland landscape paintings and motivational posters. The common room was empty except for an ancient man in a wheelchair, staring at a muted television. His face was slack, eyes distant. A care worker stood nearby, arms crossed. "Dr. Kasper?" Chen said gently. The old man didn't respond, didn't even blink. "He has advanced Alzheimer's," the care worker explained. "Hasn't spoken coherently in 18 months. Most days he doesn't know where he is." Hope stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "My father died in that bunker. My mother spent 34 years not knowing why. You're telling me this man is a vegetable," the care worker finished, not unkindly. "I'm sorry, but he's been like this for years." Rachel watched Hope's face crumple, then harden again. The possibility of confrontation, of answers, of any kind of accounting, it had evaporated like morning mist. Chen gestured them toward a conference room where evidence boxes were stacked. "We searched his apartment, found his research archives, everything." The journals were meticulous. Kasper had documented every aspect of the Hollowtown project with scientific precision. Monthly observations of Millfield from 1964 through 1989. Notes on individual subjects, including all 11 players. Rachel opened one volume at random. Subject DH-847, Derek Holloway. Third-generation mill worker, age 24, recently married. Demonstrates strong community attachment despite declining economic prospects. Father's terminal illness, mill-related emphysema, has not diminished subject's loyalty to industry or location. Interesting case study in irrational local attachment. Derek had been 34 years old when Rachel read those words. A specimen, a data point. Hope found the most damning entry dated July 28, 1989. Subjects VC923 and DH847 observed accessing Section 7 storage facility. Document removal confirmed via surveillance. Subjects now aware of project parameters. Intervention protocols under review. Recommend enhanced monitoring. "He knew," Hope whispered. "They discovered the truth in July, and Kasper knew. He watched them for 2 months knowing what they knew." The final entry was dated September 22, 1989, 1 day before the team's disappearance. Subjects exhibiting coordinated behavioral patterns suggesting group decision imminent. All 11 demonstrate psychological preparation consistent with voluntary terminal action. Project observation continues. Kasper had watched them plan their own deaths and done nothing. Documented it like a scientist observing mice in a maze. Chen closed the journal carefully. "The U.S. Attorney thinks we have enough for congressional hearings. Maybe criminal referrals for whoever's still alive from the original chain of command." "Who?" Rachel asked. "Everyone's dead or demented." "Not everyone." Chen pulled up a file on his laptop. 3 behavioral dynamics executives are still living, all in their late 80s, all with expensive lawyers. We're building the case. But they all knew the truth. There would be settlements and apologies, maybe some symbolic prosecutions that would drag through courts for years before ending in plea deals. The architects of Millfield's destruction would die comfortable. their victims still dead. Hope stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking the retirement home's manicured garden. "He gets to forget," she said. "Casper gets to forget everything he did, while my mother remembers every single day." No one had an answer for that. Rachel thought about the 11 men in the bunker, sitting in their circle, choosing oblivion. They'd understood this part, too, that the truth they'd died to preserve might be recovered, but justice never would be. At dawn, Rachel and Hope drove back to Millfield in silence.
The archives would prove the conspiracy. The journals would document the crimes. Congressional hearings would confirm what Derek's letter had claimed. But the men who'd ordered Millfield's destruction were ghosts now, hidden behind dementia, or death, or classified documents no court would ever see. The only real monument to what had happened sat beneath the Millfield ironworks, scratched into concrete. We were here. We were real. 11 men. The 11 caskets arrived at Millfield Cemetery in a slow procession that stretched 2 miles through the town's empty streets. Every storefront window bore the number 11, printed on white paper, taped where closed signs usually hung. The hardware store, Chen's Corner Market, now run by Vincent's nephew. The diner where Derek had eaten breakfast before every home game. Sarah Holloway rode in the lead car, her hands folded in her lap, watching familiar buildings slide past. Donna sat beside her, 89 now, her face carved by grief into something harder than stone. Hope sat on Sarah's other side, the pages of Derek's letter folded in her jacket pocket, the paper soft from being read and reread until the creases threatened to split. The temperature climbed toward 90 degrees. August in western Pennsylvania pressed down like a weight, the air thick and still. But the crowd at the cemetery numbered over 3,000. They'd come from Millfield and beyond. Former mill workers, descendants of the other vanished players, journalists, federal officials in dark suits who represented the government's formal apology. The cemetery occupied a hillside overlooking the Allegheny River. Below, the ironworks stood silent, its blast furnaces visible above the tree line. The bunker had been sealed 3 weeks earlier. Concrete poured into its entrance after forensics teams finished their work. Soon it would become part of a memorial park, though no one could quite say what they were memorializing. The 11 men, or the town's murdered future. Sarah helped Donna from the car. Her mother-in-law moved slowly, her cane sinking into grass softened by recent rain. They walked toward the prepared graves, 11 rectangular holes in the earth, positioned in a semicircle beneath an old oak. Identical caskets of plain pine rested beside each opening, flags draped across them. Not American flags. These bore the Cavaliers' colors, royal blue and gold. The Vargas family had arrived earlier. Maria stood between her surviving children, her hair completely white now. She touched each casket as she passed. Mateo's first, then Luis's. Her lips moved in Spanish, prayers Sarah couldn't hear but understood anyway. Rachel Kimura stood apart from the crowd, her camera hanging unused around her neck. She'd published the photos 3 weeks ago, the images that had appeared on every news outlet in America. The circle of bodies in the bunker's darkness, the deflated soccer ball, the wall with its scratched message, the Pulitzer. Committee had called yesterday. She hadn't answered. Agent Marcus Chen stood with the other federal officials, his face unreadable. He'd led the investigation that confirmed everything Derek's letter claimed, the archived memos, the psychological profiles, the decades of deliberate destruction documented in Lawrence Casper's neat handwriting. Casper himself sat in a Philadelphia memory care facility, unaware he'd ever had a name, let alone engineered a town's death. The minister was someone Sarah didn't recognize, brought in from Pittsburgh because Millfield's churches had their own grief to manage. His words washed over the crowd without landing. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes. The familiar rhythms that meant nothing when applied to men who'd been dust for 34 years, who'd chosen their end rather than live as experimental subjects. Then Hope stood. Sarah watched her daughter walk to the podium positioned between the caskets. 33 years old. Derek's jawline, Sarah's eyes. A child born into absence, raised by a mother who'd never stopped searching, who'd taught her daughter that love meant refusing to forget. Hope unfolded the letter. Her hands didn't shake. "My name is Hope Holloway," she said. The microphone carried her voice across the hillside. "I never met my father. He died 6 months before I was born, though we didn't know that until 3 weeks ago. He left me this letter. He left it for all of us." She began to read. Derek's words, preserved in his careful handwriting, described the discovery of the documents. Vincent finding the bunker while exploring. The archived files detailing how Behavioral Dynamics Corporation had selected Millfield as a test site. How they'd engineered the mill's closure through regulatory manipulation and economic pressure. How they'd embedded researchers to document the town's decline, measuring despair like scientists measuring chemical reactions. "They took our future," Hope read, "and packaged it as fate. They told us the mill closed because of market forces, because of foreign competition, because that's how the world works. They lied. They killed this town deliberately, and they watched us die slowly, and they wrote it all down in reports no one was ever supposed to read." In the crowd, someone sobbed. A man Sarah recognized from the mill, one of the workers laid off in 1982, who'd never found steady work again. He covered his face with his hands. Hope continued. "We spent weeks verifying everything. We found the correlation between their memos and actual events. We identified the consultants who visited Millfield, disguised as urban planners. We saw our lives reduced to data points in someone's research. We saw our parents' illnesses, our children's poverty, our town's death. All of it engineered, all of it observed, all of it documented as a successful experiment in controlled community destruction." Sarah closed her eyes. She remembered Derek in those final months. How quiet he'd become. How he'd stopped talking about the future, about Hope's arrival, about anything beyond the present moment. She'd thought it was fear of fatherhood. It had been knowledge too heavy to carry. "The knowledge destroyed us," Hope read. "We couldn't unknow it. We couldn't live normal lives knowing we were specimens in someone's laboratory. We couldn't raise children in a town built on lies, couldn't work jobs that existed only to measure our degradation, couldn't pretend the world was anything other than what we'd discovered it to be." Hope's voice cracked. She paused, steadying herself. "So we chose," she continued. "We chose the moment. We chose the method. We chose to vanish at our peak, after a victory, when we were together, when we were still whole. We chose to become a mystery they could never solve, an anomaly that would haunt their data forever. And we chose to leave the truth where someone, someday, might find it." Rachel Kimura wiped her eyes. Beside her, Detective Sarah Cortez stood rigid, her face wet with tears she didn't bother to hide. "To those who find this," Hope read, "we ask only that you remember we were real. We weren't data points. We weren't acceptable losses in someone's experiment. We were men who loved our families and our town. We were Derek Holloway, Vincent Chen, Mateo and Luis Vargas, Jimmy Patterson, and 6 others whose names are written below. We were the Millfield Cavaliers. We won our final game 3-2. We scored with 2 minutes remaining. And then we disappeared, not because we gave up, but because we refused to let them have the satisfaction of watching us break." The letter ended with their signatures, all 11 names, written in different hands, dated September 23, 1989, 10:47 p.m. Hope folded the pages carefully and returned them to her pocket. "They won," she said, not reading now, just speaking. "My father and his teammates, they won that game. They beat the visitors 3-2. And then they denied the real visitors, the ones who'd been watching this town for decades. The victory they wanted, the victory of seeing Millfield die quietly, seeing its people accept defeat as inevitable." She looked out at the crowd. "We know the truth now. We know what was done to us. We know who did it and why. And because my father and 10 others chose to become ghosts, chose to leave evidence no one could explain away, the world knows too. Sarah stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but Donna's hand found her elbow, holding her up. She walked to the caskets. Derek's sat in the center of the semicircle, his name on a brass plate screwed to the pine. She'd seen his body in the morgue, the mummified remains that barely resembled the man she'd loved. She'd identified him by his wedding ring, the gold band she'd placed on his finger 9 years before his death. From her bag, Sarah pulled a soccer ball, new, white and blue, fully inflated. She set it on top of Derek's casket. "You were real," she whispered. "You are real. I remember." One by one, the other families approached. Maria Vargas placed photographs on her son's caskets, Mateo and Luis as children, playing in their parents' garden. Jimmy Patterson's sister left his college acceptance letter, the scholarship he'd declined to stay with his dying mother. Vincent's nephew placed a ledger from the corner store, its pages filled with Vincent's careful handwriting. The minister spoke briefly, then the caskets were lowered. Sarah didn't watch. She stood with Hope and Donna, looking out over the valley. Below, Millfield spread along the river, diminished, declining, but still breathing, still real. The crowd began to disperse slowly. Federal officials returned to black cars. Journalists filed away, already composing their stories. Families lingered, speaking in quiet voices, processing grief that had finally found form after 34 years of abstraction. Rachel approached Sarah as the sun began its descent. "The memorial opens next month," Rachel said, "at the ironworks. They're asking for photographs, personal items, anything that shows who they were beyond what happened." Sarah nodded. "I have things. Derek's uniform from his first season, letters he wrote me, tools from when he worked the mill." "It matters," Rachel said. "The memorial. Making sure people understand they were whole lives, not just a tragedy." "They were whole lives," Sarah agreed. "They were my husband, her father." She pulled Hope closer. They were this town's sons and brothers and friends. They were real. As twilight settled over the cemetery, Sarah walked back to Derek's grave one final time. The soccer ball sat where she'd placed it, bright against the raw earth. She knelt beside the filled hole, her knees pressing into grass. "Hope read your letter," she said quietly. "The whole world heard it. They know what you did. They know why." The wind moved through the oak's branches above. "I wish you'd told me," Sarah continued. "I wish you'd let me help carry it. I wish a lot of things." She stood there for a long time, listening to the small sounds of the town beyond the trees, then pressed her palms to her eyes, took a slow breath, and walked back to Hope and Donna. The morning sun slanted through the high windows of Riverside Field's new community center, illuminating dust motes that drifted like snow. Sarah Holloway stood before a wall of photographs, her hand resting on the cool glass case that held Derek's wedding ring, the one she'd found in his locker 36 years ago. "We're ready whenever you are, Mrs. Holloway." She turned to find Marcus Chen, no longer an FBI agent, but the director of the Millfield Truth and Reconciliation Project. Gray threaded his temples now. The years had softened the sharp edges of his investigator's face. "I still don't know if this is right," Sarah said. Her voice carried the particular weariness of someone who'd spent decades searching for answers, only to discover they brought no peace. "Opening it all up again. The memorial's not about opening wounds," Chen gestured toward the windows overlooking the field, where players in royal blue and gold uniforms ran drills. "It's about making sure the scar tissue forms right." Outside, Hope Holloway stood at midfield with Rachel Kimura, both women studying the renovation plans for the bunker site. The ironworks had been transformed over the past 2 years, the dangerous structures demolished, the toxic soil remediated with settlement funds. But the bunker remained, preserved behind reinforced glass and climate control systems that kept the temperature at a constant 58 degrees. A museum now, a tomb made visible. Rachel's camera hung unused around her neck. Since the Pulitzer ceremony, she'd stopped taking photographs of Millfield. Some stories, she'd learned, demanded participation rather than documentation. "The plaque looks good," Hope said, reading the bronze text mounted outside the bunker's sealed entrance. Site of Discovery, June 17, 2023. Here 11 men chose truth over silence, sacrifice over complicity. Simple. Your father would have appreciated simple. Hope glanced at Rachel. 2 years of collaboration had built a strange intimacy between them. The woman who'd found the bodies, and the daughter who'd never known her father except as an absence. "Do you think about them? What it was like in there at the end?" Rachel looked through the thick glass at the preserved circle where the bodies had sat. The space was empty now, the remains buried at the cemetery on the hill. Only the objects remained in their original positions, encased in archival materials. The deflated ball, the arrangement of licenses, the photographs of Millfield in its glory days. "Every night," Rachel admitted, "I imagine them talking, telling stories, maybe singing." Derek's letter said they wanted to vanish at their moment of greatest victory, but I think they also wanted to leave together, as a team. My mother said he never liked being alone. At the community center, the crowd had begun to arrive. Maria Vargas, ancient now and walking with Hope's help, moved slowly toward the memorial wall. Her fingers found the photographs of Mateo and Luis, the younger brother's photo edged in black and marked, "Still missing." Despite 2 years of searching, despite Lawrence Kasper's journals and the FBI's expanded investigation of Behavioral Dynamics Corporation's 14 test sites, Luis Vargas had never been found. "Site 7, Maria whispered, touching Luis's face through the glass. "Where is Site 7? No one answered. The question had haunted every hearing, every deposition, every congressional testimony. 3 surviving behavioral dynamics executives, aged 87, 89, and 92, had pleaded the Fifth Amendment 247 times collectively. Their corporate files listed 13 sites. The 14th, referenced only in Kasper's private journals, remained phantom. The mayor approached the podium as the crowd settled. Bradford had been voted out in 2024, replaced by Hope Holloway in a landslide. At 35, she was the youngest mayor in Millfield's history, elected on a platform of accountability and renewal. "We gather today," the new mayor began, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath it, "not to celebrate, but to remember. Not to forget, but to understand." Sarah watched her daughter speak and felt something shift in her chest. Not healing exactly, but a loosening of the decades-long knot. Hope had inherited Derek's jaw, his straight posture, his capacity for controlled fury. But she'd also inherited Sarah's refusal to let silence become the final word. The ceremony proceeded with testimonies. Former mill workers spoke about economic policies they'd never understood until the documents revealed deliberate sabotage. Teachers described curriculum changes recommended by consultants who'd been behavioral dynamics researchers. A doctor admitted he'd unknowingly funneled medical records to Dr. Edmund Vickers, believing they were part of a legitimate public health study. Agent Chen took the stage to announce the Justice Department's findings. 14 towns confirmed. Estimated 47,000 people directly affected by the experiments between 1964 and 1989. Congressional appropriations totaling $380 million for settlements and economic redevelopment. Criminal referrals filed, though prosecution remained uncertain given the defendants' ages and health. But the real memorial, Chen concluded, isn't in these buildings or these funds. It's in the truth those 11 men died to expose. They understood something we're still learning. that silence is complicity's best friend, that disappearing can be a form of testimony. At the bunker site, Rachel had noticed something she'd missed on previous visits. Behind the preserved circle, partially hidden by shadow, was the wall inscription the forensic team had documented. 11 sets of initials scratched into concrete. She'd seen it in photographs 100 times, had included it in her Pulitzer-winning essay. But today, in the late morning light, she noticed something else. Below the initials, almost invisible unless you knew to look, were hash marks, 11 groups of 4 vertical lines crossed by a 5th, the universal symbol for counting days. She counted quickly, her breath catching. "Hope, come look at this." The mayor joined her at the glass, following Rachel's pointing finger. "What am I seeing? Count the marks in Derek's group." Hope counted once, then again. 63. Now count Jimmy's and Vincent's. Each group contained the same number, 63 marks, precisely rendered. "I don't understand." They died from hypoxia within hours of sealing themselves in. The medical examiner was certain. "Call Chen," Rachel said quietly. "Call him now." Within 30 minutes, a forensic team was unsealing the bunker's access panel. By afternoon, the preliminary findings had shattered the case's central conclusion. The 11 men hadn't died the night they disappeared. They'd lived in the bunker for 63 days. The discovery of a concealed storage room, missed in the original investigation, hidden behind what appeared to be a solid wall, explained everything. Cases of military rations stamped 1967, water filtration equipment, medical supplies, a chemical toilet, and most damning, 63 daily entries in a collective journal, each signed by all 11 men, documenting their final weeks. Sarah Holloway stood in the FBI's Pittsburgh office at midnight, reading her husband's words from November 25, 1989. Day 63. "The rations are gone. The water's nearly finished. We knew this day would come. We planned for it. Vincent calculated everything precisely. Tomorrow we seal the vents. Tomorrow we complete what we started. But tonight we talk about what we've built here in the dark. This journal, this testimony, the truth we'll leave behind." Jimmy jokes that we're the world's strangest book club. Mateo says we're writing the town's real history. I think we're just 11 men who refuse to be forgotten. We've laughed more in these 63 days than I have in years. Shared stories our families never heard. Learned things about each other we never knew despite playing together for a decade. Luis taught us Spanish prayers. Vincent explained his parents' journey from Taiwan. Jimmy fixed our failing ventilation 3 times with nothing but wire and ingenuity. I think about Sarah every day. About Hope, our daughter I'll never meet. Part of me wants to break down this door, run home, hold them one more time. But I think about what we found in Section 7, about what they did to our town, our families, our futures, and I know we're right to do this. Our disappearance has to be absolute, has to be inexplicable, has to force them to search. The mystery is the message. Tomorrow, we become the question that demands an answer. The journal entries revealed the truth's architecture. The 11 men had planned to survive in the bunker for exactly 2 months, long enough to ensure the investigation was massive, desperate, and baffled, long enough for their disappearance to become legendary. Then, on day 63, they'd sealed the ventilation system and sat in their circle, waiting for the oxygen to deplete. They'd died together on November 25, 1989. Precisely as planned, leaving behind a mystery timed to haunt. "They knew," Sarah whispered to Hope and Rachel in the conference room. "They knew we'd never stop searching, that eventually someone would find them. They planned all of it." Hope read her father's final journal entry, dated November 25th. "If you're reading this, you've found us. You've found the truth. Maybe years have passed, maybe decades. I hope my daughter is reading this. I hope my wife never gave up. I hope Millfield survived. We are the anomaly we chose to be. 11 men who vanished at their moment of victory. 11 men who refused to be lab rats in someone else's experiment. They took our futures, So we took our present and weaponized it. Our disappearance is our testimony. Our silence is our scream. Tell them we were here. Tell them we were real. Tell them we chose this. Remember us. The revelations transformed the memorial service into something else entirely. By evening, as the Millfield Truth took the field for their inaugural match, the crowd understood they weren't just honoring victims. They were honoring resistance. Before kickoff, the 11 current players stood at midfield, each holding a framed photograph of their predecessor. The stadium observed 11 minutes of silence. Then, Rachel Kimura, who'd sworn she was done photographing Millfield, raised her camera one final time. She captured the moment the referee's whistle blew, the ball arcing into evening air, the crowd rising as one, the scoreboard reading 0-0 beneath lights that gleamed like stars. Sarah Holloway sat with Maria Vargas, her hand in the older woman's, and for a moment the years fell away as they watched the town, small, stubborn, and newly honest, breathe together in the answer those 11 men had left behind.